The horror genre is infamous for preying on the viewer's nightmares through visceral depictions of aggression and sexuality. The terrors of the flesh force the viewer to recognize their own mortality by perverting the fragility of our bodies and exploiting the fears of what other bodies can do to us. Laura Mulvey famously coined the term the male gaze, which explains that in a patriarchal society where men are the creators of media, they become the assumed audience. Carol J. Clover, author of Men, Women, and Chainsaws, explains that horror films speak deeply and obsessively to the male anxieties and desires. Her slasher film characteristics include a psychosexually confused killer, a phallic weapon such as a knife or chainsaw, a lair for the monster that is often dark, damp, and cavernous, the sudden moment of shock, sexually active young victims, and the film's victim hero, who is usually a female-presenting virginal tomboy. Men and women tend to die at the same rate in horror films, but women's death scenes are usually far more creative and twice as long. So, what is it about watching women suffer that appeals to the male gaze? And what do the monsters in horror reflect about the fears of men? In Carrie, a teenage girl gains telekinetic powers at the onset of her period. In typical horror movie fashion, the natural is turned into a perversion. Carrie's mother is a religious zealot that is disgusted by women's sexuality and has deliberately kept Carrie unaware of the changes her maturing body will bring. Her classmates make fun of her ignorance and shame her for it, reflecting the complicit nature of internalized misogyny. Later, her mother locks her in a closet and forces her to pray away the evil thoughts that must have caused her to bear the curse of blood that the biblical Eve brought upon women. Carrie's sexuality is repressed the same way her telekinetic powers are. At the climax of the film, she is seen as coming to terms with her body and her powers just before her school bullies decide to ruin her newfound happiness. Just as she is accepting the title of prom queen, pig's blood is dumped all over her. She finally snaps, and so do her powers. She slaughters everyone with her powers, seemingly fueled through the blood and her rage. Author of the book the film is based on, Stephen King, has said that, quote, Carrie is largely about how women find their own channels of power and what men fear about women and women's sexuality. Writing the book in 1973, I was fully aware of what women's liberation implied for me and others of my sex. The book is an uneasy masculine shrinking from a future of female equality. This fear is deeply connected to ancient mythology, which produced fears of witches. Magic is associated through women's ability to create life and bleed without death. The stories of monstrous women and witches with powers far too destructive for them to wield causes women's sexuality to be seen as monstrous. Barry Grant, author of The Dread of Difference, Gender in the Horror Film, writes that the traits associated with Carrie's menses, explicitly the onset of sexuality and implicitly violence and danger, are displaced onto the telekinetic powers through which she brutally destroys objects outside her body. Her telekinesis signifies the threat that unchecked female desire may pose to society. Rosemary's Baby centers around Rosemary Woodhouse's pregnancy with the spawn of the devil. We follow Rosemary as she uncovers the truth about her pregnancy and grows increasingly paranoid as she realizes her doctor, husband, and neighbors are plotting to use her womb to birth the Antichrist. The film gives a suffocating look into Rosemary's life as she is denied agency by everyone. Her new neighbors are a seemingly harmless old couple. They are immediately invested in her desires to start a family. After the men have a private conversation, Rosemary is drugged by her husband Guy and awakens from a haze only to realize she is being raped by the devil. In the morning, Guy claims that her mutilated body and recollection of the assault is from him having rough sex with her while she was passed out. Rosemary is clearly horrified by this, but her husband jokes about it as though it's commonplace. Rosemary's health worsens as her pregnancy progresses because her body is hosting an evil creature. She is denied privacy by her nosy neighbors, she's told not to read baby books by her doctor, she's forced to wear an evil locket by her husband, and her paranoia peaks when she tries to find a new doctor, only to have him call her husband and the devil-worshipping Dr. Saperstein to come collect her as though she is a child. Rosemary's Baby turns the innocent experience of starting a family in a well-to-do area into a horrifying one. Having a woman as a film's focal character creates a feminizing experience, and this allows men to feel the terror of being a woman in a male-dominated world, particularly in the time frame that Rosemary is living in. Her sexuality is tied to her motherhood, and as her belly grows, she becomes more assertive about her needs and loses her girly appearance. Her short hair is boyish, her husband remarking that he hates it. Her skin is pale and she stops wearing makeup, but her instinct to protect her unborn child overpowers her desire to be polite and agreeable. She faces the challenges of being dismissed at every turn, but in the end, her child is still born demonic. The horror in Rosemary's Baby is less about the devil's spawn she carries and more about the perils. The Aliens franchise is arguably the most gruesome depiction of male heteronormative fears. For the purposes of brevity, only the creatures of Ridley Scott's Alien and James Cameron's sequel Aliens will be included. We follow Ellen Ripley as she battles the xenomorph, a horrific alien that has acid for blood, sexually assaults its victims, and was created to destroy everything in its path. The alien itself is a horrifying sight. It has a long penis-like head with a smaller penis mouth in its jaw to add to the psychosexual terror. Its body is humanoid yet robotic, and its different stages of life are each more terrifying than the next. The creature begins its life in eggs that are found in a damp, warm chamber that resembles a womb, the eggs having slits on top that director Ridley Scott described as one great fanny. The creature that pops out of the eggs attaches itself to a person's face, wrapping its tail around their neck and shoving its seed down their throat. After this graphic oral assault, the creature appears to die and falls off the person's face, yet they have actually impregnated them, and the poor sod is forced to host this parasite. This homosexual oral rape, as described by Alien screenwriter Dan O'Bannon, was an effective means for discomforting male viewers, and he hoped to force male audience members to understand and experience the visceral horror of rape and sexual assault. Artist and creator of the Alien, H.R. Giger, has explained that it also functions as a metaphorical dramatization of the male fear of penetration. The oral invasion was payback for all those horror films in which sexually vulnerable women were terrorized by rampaging male monsters. In the creature's third stage of life, it is birthed by the host, which it does by ripping through the person's chest, aptly named the chestburster. This clear parallel to giving birth has been described by writer of Memory, The Origins of Alien, Alexander O. Philippe, as a challenge to the patriarchal imbalance by having to witness the alien rape of a man and subsequent birthing. The creature's final adult stage takes no survivors and doesn't feed on its victims. It simply uses them as hosts to create more of itself. Its secretions offer more sexual terror, oozing fluids in a demented manner before it uses them for procreation. Giger has said that the helplessness contributes to this horror, but the personal violation of one's body by a parasite is what truly drives this fear. It's noteworthy to mention that the only survivor in the first film is Ripley, a woman who herself has experienced childbirth. O'Philippe has said that the Alien movies visualize the two things so many men look upon with disgust and horror, getting penetrated themselves and watching a woman giving birth. The creature kills and impregnates everyone on the ship, turning motherhood and childbirth into a monstrous experience that only our female protagonist and final girl Ripley is able to overcome. To further on the motherhood theme, the sequel Aliens introduces an alien queen that lays hundreds of eggs and protects them ferociously, while Ripley simultaneously protects Newt, a little girl stranded on a planet crawling with aliens. Ripley's compassion and maternal instincts fuel her desire to destroy the beast, even as the trained Marines she accompanies are destroyed. She faces off with the creature, mother to mother, and emerges victorious. By having Ripley be the one to overcome the alien and not a male character, it is a woman who overcomes the horror of rape that is represented by the alien. As film critic Nikki Bond has said, sci-fi impregnation doesn't compare to the violent brutality frequently dished out to female characters across the breadth of cinema. The terrors women represent in horror reach far beyond the scope of this short video. However, the central fears that women evoke in men center around the fear of being treated the way a woman is, be that a sexual object, a helpless child that needs guidance, or as an equal whose justified rage threatens to burn the patriarchal system down. It's no bad thing to encourage men to rethink the way in which women are treated on screen, but whether they recognize or appreciate this subtext, let's wait and see.